appreciate the discussion about the enforcement piece of it because while we have had these ECA standards in place, and as you point out, Coast Guard has been good as they are in making sure that those standards are being met. I do appreciate that this is now going to be a step up, whether for Coast Guard or for EPA on enforcement. So I wrote a note to myself making sure that we're checking in with the administration to make sure that from a budget planning perspective going forward, they are factoring this in to that expanded mission set there. I appreciate, again, I think not the optimism, but kind of the reality check that the sky is not falling. We are moving forward. The clarity of these standards have been very, very important, not only here in this country, but around the world, globally. We are going to see greater environmental positive impact, and that is very, very important. But it seems that every one of you has had kind of a little asterisk about the overall negative impact. It's going to be fine, except for those perhaps remote locations. Director Capuano, you mentioned the smaller, more remote ports might have logistical issues. It's been suggested that in some of the areas such as Alaska or Hawaii that rely more on diesel, and if it's not maritime fuel, it's aviation fuel for us. And so a couple questions, and this is directed to you, Administrator. You've mentioned that you're going to be doing continuous monitoring on this, which we appreciate. I think you actually said monthly, which is great. I'm curious to know to what extent you actually narrow it down to focus on some of these more remote and rural areas in the country, Alaska, Hawaii, that will be that have the potential to be more negatively impacted because of our high transportation costs that will be impacted.
The current EIA data collection does not go down to the state and the port level, to the smaller ports. However, we do monitor the trade press. As I said, we pay attention to the IMO each month now. And so if we start to see something changing within a specific area as a result of communications through the trade press, we will then go investigate it, and it'll be something that we could talk about as a special issue, but it's not something that we routinely collect.
Well, we want to really try to understand, and again, the reason I raise this, the reason I'm asking is not because we want to back off of this, but again, we've got some very, very challenged parts of the country, and we want to be able to figure out how they move forward in a way that's not going to damage their very somewhat fragile economies. Mr. Morgan, let me ask you, have you assessed the regional refining capacities individually, the refineries that supply places like Alaska and Hawaii and other remote and rural parts of the country? Are you convinced that they too are ready for the implementation?
As you mentioned, there are some challenges, especially getting fuel into interior Alaska. It's an expensive proposition. Alaska has 5 refineries and produces the bulk of the needs for Alaska. Some additional fuel is imported, especially from Washington State and some other locations. I don't believe that the IMO specification will present a significant additional challenge to the challenges that already exist. One factor is that home heating oil sulfur specifications in Alaska are actually haven't been reduced like they have been, for example, in the Northeast United States, where it's on par now with on-road diesel. And so actually the sulfur and home heating oil in Alaska will allow a little bit more flexibility in the short term. And so I think that the challenges that have always been there will continue to be there, of course, but Alaska's 5 oil refineries are preparing for this.
We're actually not at 5 anymore, but that's kind of a sad story. What about avgas, aviation?
Yeah, it's same. The refineries in Alaska produce the bulk of the aviation fuel. It's actually higher than the gasoline fuel demand, as you know there, and diesel is higher still. So I assume that product mix, of course, the individual companies will make those decisions, but I assume it'll continue to remain, to the same level to meet the demands in Alaska.
So let me ask a question to you, probably Mr. Butler. the considerations that a shipping company would make in determining, do we install the scrubbers, do we move to an LNG retrofit? And I appreciated your example, your visual, Mr. Webster, about 350 miles of ships waiting to have scrubbers installed. That says to me that we've got a backlog here in terms of our capacity, whether it's to build out LNG vessels, and we know that we've got some that are being built for the Alaska trade. We've seen a couple that have gone out to Puerto Rico. We'd love to see more of these coming on, but we've got shipbuilding capacity that I think is limited. So how much of a factor is the capacity to do the build out to more more LNG powered vessels? The ability to move quickly with the scrubber installation, or the factors that are under consideration by the shipping companies?
So there are quite a number of factors with respect to each of those decisions. Maybe I'll cut to the end first and then work backwards, and that is, we expect that well over 80% of the compliance will come from burning one type of low sulfur fuel oil or the other.
Okay.
As Senator Manchin said, he had a couple of statistics on projections with respect to scrubbers and LNG, and there will be increased penetration of those technologies in the short term, but they're not going to make up anything like the bulk of the compliance option. It's simply a matter of what's available and the cost and the disruption involved with retrofitting to some of the other technologies. Some folks like scrubbers, some folks don't. There are some operational challenges associated with scrubbers. And then a lot of people are looking at this and saying, well, I see a cost benefit if the spread between low sulfur and high sulfur fuel oil stays high for a long time. I get a payoff from the scrubber. But if that differential shrinks in a fairly short order, maybe it's not worth taking that step.